Good afternoon, everyone, and well, actually, good late morning, everyone, and welcome to the only program session today dedicated specifically to attacking abuse around the world. My name is Licen, and I coordinate the sport management programs at Washington State University, and I will be your moderator today. If you don't mind, let me encourage our esteemed audience to please try and come sit a bit closer, just for a warmer and more supportive overall experience. So if your master plan was to sit in the last row, please do not be afraid to come forward in more ways than one. Attacking abuse around the world, indeed, is the title of our session, as each of the four presenters hails from a different continent. We are on a tight schedule, so I will do my very best to keep the trains running on time to ensure we have some time for discussions and questions and comments in the end. The first presenter is Murali Krishnan, who is a freelance broadcaster based in New Delhi. He's a correspondent for Deutsche Welle, Radio France Internationale, and a 24-year veteran of many other publications. Today, he will discuss abuse and lawlessness in Indian sport.
Thank you. I have about 11 minutes, 10 minutes, so therefore I want to cut to the chase. The aim of this presentation to explain how, despite laws to deal with sexual harassment in sports in India, authorities and administrators turn a blind eye. India is making strides in sports, especially young, impoverished women from rural backgrounds who have made a mark but fear the loss of a career, employment, and the stigma are factors that prevent sports persons from coming out. The fact that there is little publicity in this area allows the perpetrators to flourish. The Larry Nassar case reveals how even with trusting and watchful, responsible parents, athletes are subject to abuse. In sports, where the human body is integral to success, the line demarcating a good touch from a bad one often gets blurred, resulting in disastrous consequences. While the Nassar drama played out in US courtrooms thousands of miles away in India, there's been an unnerving quiet regarding the prevalence of sexual abuse, harassment in Indian sport. In India, however, there's a topic where omerta is firmly in place. No athlete wants to fully talk about it, less so officials. India's hunting grounds. In late September 2018, the Me Too movement in India brought to light several cases of sexual harassment in Indian workspaces. However, even before the Me Too movement began in India, there have been reports of sexual harassment in Indian sport across this country. A list of, I just want to run through you this very fast. And if I can, with the fact is I am running on time, I want to stick to the timeline. A list of publicly reported cases follows. In 2009, probables of the Andhra Pradesh cricket team lodged a complaint against Andhra Cricket Secretary V. Chamundeshwari. No. Yeah, that's it. V. Chamundeshwari. He was demanding sexual favors in exchange for selection to the team. The Andhra Cricket Association subsequently sacked him. But 10 years later, though, Chamundeshwari holds two esteemed positions right now. President of the Hyderabad District Badminton Association and the Vice President of the Telangana Badminton Association. All right, and in 2010, and just when India sports was sporting prowess surmounting enviable heights, we had a 19-year-old Hima Das from the northeast state of Assam, and sprinting off to glory. And she won the gold medal in the 400-meter race at the IAAF in Finland last year. But then, Nipon Das, the man next to her right now, he was accused of sexual harassment. But since then, there's been a conspiracy of silence. In 2010, members of the Indian national women's hockey team wrote to the sports ministry complaining against the head coach, Maharaj Krishnan. That's him you see on the screen right now. He was fired, but later bagged another position as a high-profile manager for the Central Hockey Zone. And the following year, Tulsi, a boxer from Tamil Nadu, she alleged that the Tamil Nadu Boxing Association General Secretary A.K. Karnakaran demanded she perform sexual favors in return to a position on the team. While Karnakaran was arrested, his arrest saw at least a dozen senior boxers visit the commissioner's office, stating the allegations of fraud. But nevertheless, the boxer then left Chennai and started off switching to kickboxing and mixed martial arts. In 2014, in preparation for the Olympic Games, a young female gymnast, then her coach Manoj Rana, and a fellow male player had made disparaging comments about her clothes during a training session at the Indira Gandhi Indoor Stadium in New Delhi. The Sports Authority of India launched a probe, but a larger conspiracy was alleged. Meanwhile, the accused coach and player flew with the team to Asian Games. The gymnast alleged that the federation officials tried to get her to withdraw the complaint. However, until 2017, at the very least, Rana was still coaching at the IGI Stadium. And more importantly, as recently, archery coach Sunil Kumar, he was sent home from the Youth World Archery Championship in Argentina for inappropriate behavior against a British archer and stands suspended as is now. Look, there are many things I can talk about right now. Discus throwers, many things I can talk about. Anju Bobby George, the woman, yeah, that's her. She's a former World Athletics Championship medalist who was member of the 9-member panel which was tasked in 2000 with formulating the Uniform National Development Code. You know what she says? She talked to me. She says, as a former athlete myself, I know it can be difficult for athletes to speak up. Even she's from my home state, which is the southern state of Kerala. And she says, she tried to push in for a 24/7 helpline for athletes. And she says, even right now, her file sits in the sports ministry as of now. Indian sport now is ridden with danger zones. More commonly found in individual sport rather than the team, because the collective, can often have the strength and safety of numbers to lodge a formal complaint. But the most common official response when handling a complaint by a woman is that the scandal is a campaign to discredit a particular official. with elections round the corner. And there are now internal complaints committees, but nothing works. Nothing ever really works in India. And this is not a naming and shaming, because India's sporting bureaucracy is very vindictive, with no meaningful grievances, mechanisms, especially for female athletes. Naming a predatory coach or official becomes revealing the name of the athlete, which inevitably then, I got 1 minute out there, marks the end of athlete's sports career and livelihood. You know, is there no way out of this? It exists in law, but then laws in India are normally in paper. Still doesn't work. You know, if it can only come from the pain and rage of a single influential female athlete whose voice can unlock the floodgates. It's happened in the past, but it's not gone the full Monty out here. Or if one athlete methodically charts and records a history of abuse, takes it to courts, and hopes for a sympathetic judge, or if someone takes a brave point and takes it to Indian sports backlist, well, that is normally the case out here. I'm going to end up, I still have a lot to talk about, but what I'm trying to say is that which is that, based on the assumption that one active offender harasses around 50 victims, a conservative estimate considering the Larry Nasser was accused of harassing over how much? You know? 250 women, right? The figures indicate there in India, there nearly could be 200 sexual offenders and 10,000 survivors across 53 Indian major sports. Thank you.
Let that resonate. Earlier this year, the most careful observers, or perhaps only the most careful observers, have picked up that the members of the American women's national soccer team were not the only female soccer players to complain about unequal treatment when compared to members of the men's team, and indecent proposals, indecent proposals, and this is what was experienced by the Colombian women's national soccer team. Maria Juliana Perez, who is a recent graduate of the University of Applied and Environmental Sciences in Bogota, as well as a former soccer player, will share some details.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maria Juliana Perez. I am a sports science professional, graduated from the UDCA University at Colombia. I used to be a soccer player when I was younger, and also I am super passionate about sports. Today I come to share with you a paper about the female soccer in Colombia. The name is "The Colombian Soccer Players Broke Their Silence." And the co-author of the paper and my friend is Maria Morales. She is the former captain of one of the most important teams in Colombia. The name is Independiente Santa Fe. And as well, she is a sports science student. Today, she can't be here with me, but we are super thankful to have this opportunity to share this with you. So to begin, this happened a couple of months ago. This year, between February and March, female players from the Colombian national soccer team came out through different social media to speak up and report internal problems from the national federation. The first players that complained about the treatment from the Colombian Football Federation towards them were Melissa Ortiz and Isabella Echeverri. The players said that they weren't afraid anymore, so they posted a video on social media on February 18, 2019, And in the video, they make clear that the Soccer National Federation executives weren't paying them fairly, neither supporting them with international flags or uniforms. They have been wearing old ones. This subject seemed to be over because there weren't immediate reactions from the National Federation. However, days later, 2 other accusations came to light. They went even further, exposing internal issues regarding the under-17 women national team. The physiotherapist, Carolina Rosso, and John Cano, father of one of the players, accused some members from the coaching staff of sexual harassment. Those declarations awake the press, of course, and people start talking about it. It's important to mention these accusations right now are under the justice hands. They are investigating, the case is open, so hopefully it's just about time to know what happened for real. But well, continuing, after those declarations, the National Federation came out with Álvaro González, the vice president, in a press conference to clarify all these allegations, but his statements aggravated the situation. He said he wanted to transform the National Female League into an amateur one and only for girls under 23 years old. So after this, the athletes more involved from the female national team and concerned summoned a press conference. Maria, my friend and co-author of this paper, was there. The players presented some internal subjects of the team with details and proofs, including audios and letters where the federation stopped summoning players who spoke out loud about these issues. Afterwards, the answer from the National Federation came with Ramon Jesulón. With Ramon Jesulón, the president of the National Federation, who summoned a meeting with the players to resolve and come to an agreement. Jesulón listened to them, to the requirements and conditions from the players in order to perform their best on the field. As well, the footballers requested support from the federation to resume the professional female soccer league in Colombia during the second semester of the year, a subject which they agreed. Just to be clear, the league was on hold because the organizers argued female league wasn't profitable. Nowadays, after those events, the female national soccer team won the gold medal at the Pan American Games. We are super proud about this. I have the opportunity to speak with the former captain of the national team, Natalia Gaitán, and she said she feels great. She has been receiving messages from girls and parents inspired for their performance as athletes and as a role models for new generations. Also, she let me know that before it was really hard to talk with the executives of the federation because of the issues and the press, but now after having those good results, the federation is more open to hear them and help them as a sport woman. Also, the professional soccer league in Colombia for the female athletes has been made for the second semester of the year, but for real it just lasted three months. The final was like 15 days ago. Unfortunately, my friend team lost during the quarterfinals. The winner team was América de Cali. Also, it's important to mention this female league was complicated and hard to follow, and also for the players because the organizers put the games during working hours. For example, a Wednesday 10 a.m. So it's impossible to go to the stadium at that time. Anyways, the fans try to support them, but the organizers make it harder for us with those schedules, but also because it was really hard to follow these games officially. Just one TV channel was transmitting the games, and unofficially, a female soccer fan page at Facebook was trying to transmit them, but they don't have the technology to broadcast the games. One important thing to mention is the female players nowadays are having periodic meetings with the Colombian Vice President Marta Lucía Ramirez, since in her agenda the fight for equal rights for women and men is a priority, so it's a good point for the female soccer. As well, through Aqualfutro, that is the National Association for Professional Soccer Players, they presented a new formal petition signed by 1,140 players, men and women, to the organizers of the Professional Soccer League and the National Federation, asking things such as longer league, better working conditions, reasonable schedules, contract guarantees like payments, insurance, and better terms in form of the players. In favor of the players. They are waiting for a formal meeting or at least an official answer from the federation and the organizers of the professional league. And finally, as conclusions, Maria and me, we believe it's very important to hear the people who speaks about these issues inside the sport, because listening gives a new perspective and visibility in order to find better solutions for these issues related. And last and most important, practicing sports implicate respect between everyone. Doesn't matter the position, the role, the sex, or the age. Everyone should be professional and work for a better sport practice. And here is Maria. Well, we don't have sound.
I would like to thank you for paying attention to female Colombian soccer reality, but also ask for your support. Watch our league, generate strategies and solutions. Build and fight for a better sport environment. Thank you. Bye.
We are not for pointing fingers at anyone, we are just showing another perspective, and I will be super happy to answer questions if I know the answer, and also receive suggestions if you want to say something to me, and I will bring this to Colombia. Thank you so much.
A mental note, no pressure for you all. Come up with suggestions to take back to Colombia, but what a great request. Now, Canada has in many ways an admirable human rights record. A notable stain on this record comes from Canadian treatment of its First Nations. Freelance journalist, former cyclist, and rowing champion, as well as play the game veteran Laura Robinson, will discuss how police bias may influence investigations into sexual assault allegations, also in connections to sports settings. Well,
thank you very much. I can't actually talk about police violence right now because a report came out 3 weeks ago and it's confidential for the next few months. So it's not like there's nothing to talk about when it comes to Canada and sexual abuse. So I am talking about 27 years and counting. I'll also give Play the Game a more detailed analysis than I could do in 10 minutes. But on December 2nd, 1992, I wrote a piece for the Toronto Star entitled Sexual Abuse, a Guilty Secret in Sports, and had interviewed women who, while in high school, were sexually assaulted by their school rowing coach. It took approximately 20 years before they spoke about the ordeal. And I wondered if I hadn't started asking other women athletes if they'd ever had a coach who crossed the line, if these athletes ever would have come forward. You're taught a lesson. It's called, "You are who I say you are." So when he says he wants to make love to you and you're his special girl and you're only 16, you believe him, one of the women from the school team told me. This was the first article in Canada on sexual abuse. Why did I start asking this question? Because of my own experiences in cycling, where I had a wonderful club, the Mississauga Cycling Club, pretty much saved my life. But as soon as I went beyond the club level, there was a very predatory environment, a sexually predatory environment in cycling. I ended up loving and hating my sport. But what I really wanted to make sure is that no other girls were going to have to go through the ordeal that many of the girls and young women in my sport went through. And that includes, as Eva Radomski talked about yesterday, when you're in the culture, you may not be the direct victim, but it victimizes everyone in the culture. I knew by the time I was 16 I was going to start writing about this stuff. And when I wrote the piece, the province of Ontario was writing a gender equity policy for sport. Somehow this document, which was only 3.5 pages long, had taken from 1987 to 1992 to compose. It still wasn't finished, and it didn't contain a single word about sexual abuse or harassment. Well, yesterday we heard about the grooming of a community that Nancy Hogshead-Maker talked about. So the sexual harassment and abuse becomes so normalized that people actually don't see it, even though it's happening right in front of them. Nikki Dryden talked also about the swim coach who gave male members of the team the right, basically, to harass and abuse female members because the coach, it was top down from the coach. The women I interviewed competed in the 1970s. Those of us who were around in the 90s will remember in 1999, Anita Hill bravely told her story about the pathological sexual harassment she endured by Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. Well, if we're talking about the American Supreme Court or not, and not sport, it would be safe to say that not much has changed in the United States. Hence, sociologists talk about rape cultures. In 1992, the year the Toronto Star ran my piece, was the same year that the Minister of Tourism, Sport and Culture at the time, Peter North, had to resign over alleged sexual misconduct. Not to be upstaged by the Americans, on January 25th, 2018, 25 years after the Ontario Minister of Sport resigned because of sexual harassment, the federal Minister of Sport, Kent Hare, resigned because of sexual harassment. It's safe to also say not much changed in Canada. But back to our timeline. So in 1993, the CBC TV, The Fifth Estate, and I produced Crossing the Line, which was a documentary about the brave women from the rowing team, a girls' provincial swim team, and women from the national volleyball team. They all spoke about sexual abuse they had suffered at the hands of their coaches. It won many awards and broke the ratings records for that show, but did anything change? In 1994, a number of sport organizations reacted to the documentary by publishing Harassment in Sport, a Guide to Policies, Procedures, and Resources. In it they wrote, quote, "Evolving attitudes are lifting the shrouds of secrecy, which for so many years made harassment a forbidden topic. The process was accelerated by the airing in June 1993 of the CBC TV program Crossing the Line, a provocative investigation of harassment in coaching. With Crossing the Line, the veil was lifted publicly and harassment revealed as a blight on sport as well as society as a whole," end quote. The problem is that the documentary was not about sexual harassment. It was about the rape, sexual assault, and sexual exploitation of female athletes. These are criminal offenses. Sexual harassment, while completely unacceptable, cannot get you fired. It can get you fired. You can get kicked off a team or an organization, and it could contravene a code of conduct. But it's not listed in the Criminal Code of Canada. These sport organizations use public funds to minimize and decriminalize the very courageous stories of the athletes. I would argue that no matter how often the Canadian Minister of Sport, Sport Canada, the Coach and the Coaches Association of Canada say they want to eradicate sexual abuse in sports, this original misrepresentation is still the blueprint used. To this day, despite the strong and powerful advice from dozens of national team athletes that the government must fund a completely independent investigative body, this has not happened. Additionally, there were certainly no shortage of sexual abuse stories, with the disclosure by former NHL player Sheldon Kennedy that his junior hockey coach had sexually abused him, and as it turned out, a number of other teenage players hit the front pages for much of 1997. The Fifth Estate and I got together again to do this documentary in 97 on thin ice. We looked at the Sheldon Kennedy case, multiple hazings, initiations of the athletes, and the gang rape of females by the teams. My book of the same name followed in 1998. Stories continued to surface, but no one seemed to notice how frequently athletes were disclosing abuse. On October 15th, 2015, 22 years later, after my first article, Marcel Abou, the president of the Canadian Olympic Committee, resigned after women alleged sexual harassment. In the end, hundreds of women came forward to the allegations, and the French, the Quebec press had this shot and named Putin as Poutine. And for any Canadian in the room, they know what poutine is. Just want to go through a couple more shots of Monsieur Abou. Then, in February 2019, the CBC investigation showed that between 1998 and 2018, 222 coaches were convicted of sexual abuse in cases that involved over 600 athletes, with 34 more cases still to be heard. So what I also want to talk about, though, is the culture around it. Just as the Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas case showed that what was happening in sport was part of a bigger context, what was happening in Canadian sport? Well, this is a shot I took at the Canada House at the media night during the opening of the London 2012 Olympics. You see Monsieur Abou there, and also another gentleman named Gordon Campbell. He was High Commissioner to England at the time, and he hosted the event, and he had been the Premier of BC during the Vancouver Olympics. In February 2019, a woman came forward from the staff of Canada House and alleged that this High Commissioner, Gordon Campbell, had groped her. And I just happened to take this shot. It wasn't until I downloaded it that I thought, oh, that's a very interesting shot of Gordon Campbell. And behind him is a man named Dimitri Soudis. Dimitri Soudis came from the Conservative Party. He was the chief of staff for the Prime Minister at that time, Stephen Harper. He brought his Conservative Member of Parliament fiancé with him to this, and by that time he was the Executive Director of Communications for the Canadian Olympic Committee. So he definitely wore more than one hat there. And I just want to wrap up by saying the shot on the left is one I took after the Vancouver 2010 Olympics. It was the wrap-up of how hockey went. It was in Toronto. There were more what they call Molson girls than there were female panelists at this event. And I contrast that to what I do in order to stay sort of sane, which is be at grassroots sports. These are some of the kids I coach in a First Nations called Chippewa-Nawash First Nation. We have a fabulous time. To me, this is way more about sport than that big gathering in Toronto of the hockey poobahs. And I basically can't watch the Olympics, but I can also always have time for these children. And now I'm just happy to say that these little ones, exactly these girls who are waiting to go down the hill, this winter I will have a program with them and their children, because now they have children in kindergarten. So there is a wonderful place for in sport, but as far as I'm concerned, it does no longer exist at the elite level. Thank you very much.
Not quite the presentation that I announced, which probably makes things only worse, but apologies for my mix-up. Now, many times sexual abuse, and luckily we ended on a slightly more positive note. Many times sexual abuse is not reported simply because victims do not realize they have been victimized, and they may not know what constitutes unacceptable behavior and may not simply know who to turn to. So Mojca Doupona, she's a professor of sports sociology at the University of Ljubljana, and she will present the results of a study on perceptions of sexual abuse and violence among sport and victim assistance organizations in Slovenia.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, I will present in the name of also my co-author, Sunčica Portolucci from University of Ljubljana, Croatia. So in my presentation today, I will speak a little bit about cultural structure in Slovenia to emphasize why it's important that we break silence when we speak about sexual violence. And then I will present in short some researches and of course results, and then I will conclude with a movie like a video to raise awareness of sexual violence in Slovenian society. Before I go to the results, I would like to mention where Slovenia is. Maybe you know, or maybe you're not. It's important because this is a very small country, small society in central of Europe, but culturally we belong more to Balkan. This is important because we were many years part of Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia was a socialistic country. And in such a country also male role is very dominant, like especially in sport. So all the positions, important positions, proceed from male. And when we speak about sexual violence, then it's difficult to say anything because usually athletes, they don't want to speak because athletes have the talent and they want to achieve some good results, and they know that they can achieve such results only with the help of the coaches, and the coaches usually are men. So if they feel that this environment is not safe, they will never say anything. They will just continue training and try to get the best results. In Europe we did a lot in the last years. Starting with, for example, white paper on sport, almost 10 years ago was written, so there we can find some recommendations. For us was very important also European work plan for sport. Why? Because they recognize that we need more researchers in this area, and so we started to run a few projects, Erasmus Plus projects, in sport, and then they follow also, for example, some researches supported by Council of Europe, and now also some initiatives in some countries or sport clubs or federations also try to do some investigation in this area. But for my presentation, the starting point was the European project Erasmus Plus Voice. And the aim of this project was to find some data on sexual violence in Europe, in sport, and produce some educational material. And Slovenia, or University of Ljubljana, was part of this project. And we found that we have many obstacles when we want to do some research on sexual violence. Why? So there are many different obstacles probably, but one of them are, because Slovenia is a very small country, only 2 million of people, so then this voice project was based on narratives, on interviews, so we wanted to get stories from the survivors, and it was really tough task to do it, because no one wanted to speak about that. No one wanted, so athletes were afraid to be recognized, even the people usually, because in one way we feel it's a small country, it's better because we know each other better, so you know that in some environment happened some sexual violence probably, but no one wanted to speak. So they said, oh, we don't know anymore nothing about this, and so on. So, but nevertheless, we, through the project, we did some interviews, 4 interviews, but later on 2 athletes changed their mind and they said, we don't want that you use our data, our report for final report. We did a national forum, so this, from my point, was a starting point that we started to speak in our society about sexual violence, because still today it's quite a taboo area, and with the project maybe we broke this, because we ran also the national forum, and this national forum was broadcasted, or the media report really only for 1 day, but still they reported in all national channels or TV and radio about this event. So after this event, we wanted to know what is the society perception of the need for action and protection of young athletes against sexual harassment in sport. So after the forum, we did a focus group. We had a focus group with 35 participants. These participants were from different fields. There were coaches, PE teachers, also people who work in some ungovernmental organizations, deal with protection of children. So we mainly spoke about what is the situation in Slovenia at the moment about sexual harassment and abuse, and where we want to go. So what we want to achieve in the future to change the perception of society and to be more sensitive to this topic. So the participants all knew that the sexual violence is punishable by law, but they were not sure what is sexual harassment and what is abuse. And they wanted more this clear distinction, especially in Slovenian language, because we don't have this in Slovenian language. They asked also for a specific list of behavior, how they in particular sports, where if you can touch the athlete or not, in such occasions you can or you cannot. Also some guidance for example, coaches when they need to speak in such sensitive topic. And they found out that coaches are not trained, for example, if they found that the environment is unsafe, they don't know, they have not knowledge to speak with their athletes. But the participants of the group was not normal, but the regular members of the society, because they were willing to come to this forum and for the workshop. So they're different, but they think that individual person is more important than the results. They say that we need to make a society more sensible, so that every club or at least federation need to have a safe, a person who's trustable, who the athletes can speak about with such person, and that we maybe need ambassadors to raise awareness of, about the topic, so against sexual violence in the future. And they again stress that coaches or PE teachers, they need to be trained. They need to have additional education, that they will be prepared how they should behave or safe behave, or to do a nice environment for their athletes. So they suggest a zero tolerance, of course, in such questions. However, we didn't do a lot, but at least we broke the taboo, maybe. So we started to speak about the sexual violence, that this sexual violence also exists in Slovenian society. And instead of the conclusion, I would like to show you the short video. It's a material we produced during our project to raise awareness against sexual violence in sport.
Kaj je moje življenje?
Že kot otrok sem sanjal, da bom uspešen športnik.
Treningi in tekmovanja mi omogočajo izredna doživetja in občutke.
Toda včasih ljudje uporabljajo šport kot izgovor.
Ko želijo komentirati tvoje telo ali spolno usmerjenost.
Ko oprezajo za tabo v garderobi.
Ko se te želijo dotakniti ali poljubiti.
In včasih grejo še dlje.
Brez svoje primerite.
To se dogaja tako v vrhunskem kot v rekreativnem športu.
Dogaja se otrokom, mladostnikom in odraslim.
To je zelo narobe.
To je veliko preko meje spolno sprejemljivega vedenja.
V nekaterih primerih gre celo za spolno zlorabo.
Tega ne smemo dopuščati.
To je kaznivo dejanje.
Tebi ne smejo napretiti odgovornosti za dejanja drugega. Ti nisi kriv. Ti nisi kriv.
Zato ni mesta v športu.
Tega ti ne sme nihče storiti.
Niti tvoj trener, niti zdravnik, niti fizioterapeut.
Noben član ekipe, noben sotekmovalec ali nasprotnik.
Niti en samca član kluba ali navijač.
Želim nekaj storiti proti takim početjem.
Skupaj se lahko upremo spolnim zlorabam v športu.
Da spregovorimo o tem.
Ni lahko deliti svoje zgodbe z drugim.
Toda ti to zmoreš in si želiš govoriti o tem, kaj se je zgodilo.
Vedno je nekdo, ki te je pripravljen poslušati.
Člani skupine Voice ti bodo pomagali in te poslušali.
Na nas je, da postavimo meje.
Da rečemo tudi ja, dlje pa ne.
Tako bo šport vedno prijeten in varen.
Thank you. Now, our presenters were admirable in terms of following suggested time recommendations. So we do have 17 minutes for questions, comments, and discussion. So let's try to accommodate as many people as possible. I'm happy to see some hands go up, and we already have the first person who would like to make a comment there. Again, let's, if at all possible, let's try to keep our remarks brief. So we can accommodate as many questions as possible. And please, audience members, remember to introduce yourselves before asking the question.
Hello, so my name is Shuri Becker. I'm a prize research fellow at the University of Bath in the UK. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much for these presentations today. We've seen presentations on this topic over the last few days, but more than a few people here have mentioned to me how the focus up until now has very much been presentations and research and stories from the global north, and so it's really nice to see some representation from other spaces as well. So on that topic, what I'm really interested in is policy or prevention response and what we can do about this, how we can move forward and prevent harassment and abuse in sports settings. And what I'm interested in is your views on whether resources such as the IOC toolkit and those kinds of international resources are relevant and useful in your settings in other places in the world, or whether it's more useful to develop grassroots or contextualize resources for your context and settings.
Who wants to start? Mojca?
Yeah, I know this IOC tool, so it's really a great material. So our Olympic Committee planned to translate in Slovenian language, even though we need to do some corrections for our society probably, and this is one step. So Olympic Committee will do this, but if we will not present this to athletes and explain them, then we will not. It's nothing. So then we can say what Olympic Committee used to say. We are doing this, and so we are advanced in this. But if this will not be implemented in practice, so then we are at the beginning.
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I mean, I talked a lot, I think, about the culture of sport, right, which is very patriarchal, and the IOC is very patriarchal, and I saw this in Canada too, where they imagine that there's someone out there who has infiltrated sport, as opposed to this is what sport created, and as Marcy Hamilton said the other day, what a great place for a pedophile to hang out, and I saw that when I did my stuff on junior hockey. They buy, sell, and trade boys by the time they're 14. Why wouldn't you go there if you wanted a piece of that boy? It would be perfect. It's a perfect place. So sport has not looked at what it really is yet. And I also think in terms of looking at what the IOC has put online, they've used some of the stuff from Canada. Rule of 2 has really been touted in Canada. I honestly thought that meant 2 athletes with 1 coach, because that's when I felt safe. My brother was with me, and I knew I was safe. Take my brother away and add another coach? I don't know why I would feel safe. And in terms of grassroots, all those kids that I coached in First Nations, they're very vulnerable children. And the safeguard for me was bringing their grandmothers with us. Every time we traveled, we had a whole bunch of grandmothers, and they could see a predator a mile away. And so this idea that they have self-appointed themselves, even though the whole thing happened under their watch, that somehow they're the purveyors of this moral high ground, I think that's completely untrue. And secondly, we need to look outside of sport. And I think what Marcy presented 2 days ago was very, very important. And I definitely look outside of sport. I look at what were the results of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Indian residential schools. What did they say about predators? What did they say about patriarchy and power? And until sport looks inside itself, I think it's Band-Aids.
Thank you.
Well, at Colombia, we have the same regulations that the FIFA, like the National Federation, have the protocols to follow all these cases, but it's just at the paper. I think the players don't know how are the procedures or how can they do this. So the resources are there, but I think they need more education to do this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, you keep driving.
One quick one. Those were famous athletes in the video? They were famous athletes that people recognize?
Nikki.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's pretty amazing that if they were famous athletes, because that has a lot of power, especially seeing the male athletes in the video. So I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, but they were not victims, so they're like ambassadors. And we had a lot of problems to get famous athletes in Slovenia. So, for example, skiing is one of the prestigious sports in Slovenia, so we wanted a skier, female skier, but she said, I'm too busy, it's nice, I support your project, but I'm too busy. So she didn't want to be in such an environment or friendship. But 3 of them were former students of my university. So that's, and all of them I personally know. That's why they said, okay, no problem, we can do it. But for the society, for race awareness, it's good.
Yes, well, this is, I suppose, the Slovenian equivalent of student athletes. You know, this is what you get from student athletes in Slovenia, and also some of them were actually former athletes. So not all current athletes will have the courage to step up. Yeah, Nikki.
But I'll just ask another sort of very different question. So one of the things I'm thinking about is how these international sporting organizations empower people in countries to behave in this manner. So if we look at what happened in Afghanistan with the women's football team, you know, the man who orchestrated the rape of the entire team and the selling of their virginity to other sports administrators, you know, 2 years earlier, or probably at the same time, he won FIFA's Fair Play Award and went to, you know, FIFA's big event and received all these accolades. So in addition to the funding that he received as the head of the Afghan Federation, he also received awards and accolades, which in my argument and opinion would lead to the empowerment of him as a person, both how people viewed him in the country and then how he viewed himself. So, you know, in your experiences in your countries, is this veneration and empowerment and titles that people receive from the international federations, are they empowering this bad behavior on the ground more so?
All of us. Do you want to start? Okay, well, I know back in the 90s, for instance, our national cycling track coach was up on a number of charges of sexual exploitation, sexual interference. These were girls. While he was awaiting trial, the Olympic Solidarity sent him to Trinidad and Tobago to coach. He was acquitted, mainly because the girls had talked to each other and the judge had to acquit because their evidence could have been contaminated. But the judge said, this does not necessarily mean that I believe the defendant. And another tribunal may find that he should ethically or morally never coach again. And I think, Bruce, you may know about this case too. I don't believe the tribunal was ever set up by the Canadian Cycling Association or Sport Canada, the Canadian Olympic Committee or any of that. He ended up in the States coaching the junior national team. I went into the American cycling office at the Pan Am Games in '99. I wanted to ask them why. Had they actually read the decision? Well, as usual, I got yelled at and kicked out. But then in 2011, a woman contacted me from the States and told me the whole story about what he was doing down there. So that was one example in our sport. But I would also like to say that, you know, the story I've been working on for 8 years now on John Furlong, the CEO of the Vancouver Olympics. 65 people have come forward now, either alleging he abused them, they witnessed his abuse, or they reported his abuse. Every time those people see that during the Calgary bid for the 2026 Olympics that he was involved, of course, in the lead up and during the Olympics, they couldn't watch the Vancouver Olympics at all because he was often on TV. And every time they saw him supported and circling of the wagons of the Canadian sport family, which I would definitely argue is a big incestuous family, they had terrible, not days, weeks, because what they saw was that their voice didn't count, no one was listening to them, and that therefore dozens of First Nations people must be liars, while this one man, this white man, is telling the truth. So it wasn't just about how much the Canadian sport establishment helped him out. It was how much they hurt these people who were brave enough to come forward about it.
Willie, what do you make of this?
Nikki, your question was whether the Afghan example would hold an exemplar for the rest of the world. Am I right?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
Tough. Not in South Asia. The fact is, in Asia, right, we're not talking about the Western society out here. It's all brushed under the carpet, completely. It's a very tough call for a woman to come out and say this. And like I said in my speech out there earlier, the Larry Nassers of India, of South Asia, they're wrong. They're wrong, and it's tough for them to come out. And it takes a lot of courage to someone to step out and come out of the closet and say, look, yes, I've been abused. It takes a lot. One hell lot of gumption out there. And why do you have laws out there? You have your committees, nothing works. No one ever, the fact that, like I said, in a good part of Asia, looking at societies where impoverished girls finally make the bench, make the cut, but then they don't want to go beyond that.
Mojca, do you have any comment?
I have only one example. When I did the interviews with survivors, one athlete told me a story. So when she applied to the club what happened and that she was abused, the coach lost the job, but then really very soon, in a few months, he got a recommendation from track and field federation, and he went to another European country to be a coach, so he got a position there. So that was just to clear our environment, but we didn't care about environment far from us.
That's on the up-to-date.
Well, in Colombia we have one case where one of the presidents of one team, this is like more power abuse. He was kind of mad and he said the players of this team were just drunk, like they drink a lot of alcohol and they are lesbians, and they were the winners of the female national league. And when the girls speaks about this, his declarations, the player who was like the leader, the federation stopped summoning there, and the president of this club is still there. So nothing happened.
Please join me in thanking the presenters for this insightful panel on abuse quite literally around the world. Let's give them a round of applause.